Thank you, Anne and Nancy, for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. And really, the only important stuff on this slide is that one, I am technical. I used to be a software developer. And two, that I'm really passionate about my family, threat intelligence, and Lego, and not necessarily in that order. So what are we here to talk about today? I'd like to share my agenda so you can see what's coming up. We're going to talk about what is cybersecurity? What does that really mean? What are some of the SMB cyber concerns that Ekaru and I hear about? And I'm going to walk you through a phishing as a service attack that is a real attack. Then I'm going to show you how you could protect your business against this and other cyber threats. And then we'll talk a little bit about risk and responsibility. Then we'll wrap it up with a cyber analogy and give you some time to ask some questions if you'd like. So what exactly is cybersecurity? I feel like this is one of those words that we've heard so much that really it's lost its meaning. So I have this little quote here, and I'll give you a couple seconds. Does anyone know what my favorite movie is? What movie this comes from? This is from The Princess Bride. So, but seriously, what is cybersecurity really about? It's actually about managing risk. So I'm in the business of cybersecurity. Anne and Nancy are in the business of cybersecurity, but you aren't necessarily in the business of cybersecurity. So you may think of it as a cost center. So it's only going to make sense when it improves your risk posture or aligns with your business processes and saves you money. And cyber solutions can actually align with your business processes and save you time and money. So what are some of the SMB or small to medium-sized business cyber concerns that I hear when I'm talking to people like you? Well, the first one is confusion. Many times people think of cybersecurity as strictly an IT challenge, when really it's a business challenge. Now, there are IT components of that challenge, and we'll talk more about the components a little later, but it truly is a business challenge because you have to consider your business objectives, you have to consider your risk tolerance, and you have to make the decisions that are right for your organization. And again, you're not necessarily in the business of cybersecurity, so you have other priorities, right? And that's why you'd want to lean on a trusted partner to help you get through deciding what you should do. Again, complexity of a shifting workforce. So many of you have now increased your threat service because you have employees that are working from home and they may not be behind that firewall or have that same protection that they did when they were working in an office. You may have no one in your organization that has any cybersecurity skills. You may not have written or formal business continuity and disaster recovery plans or a formal incident response policy. And with inflation, like everything else, the costs to respond and recover from an incident have grown greatly. As far as global legislation, there's been many, many new laws in the past few years. Most of them have to do with compliance and privacy. There's some new things, some new guidance coming out about AI. And really, the most important thing for you to understand here is that the guidance has to do with, or the legislation is really about where your client is located, not necessarily where you are located. And then there's a whole aspect of cyber warfare. I could do a whole series just on cyber warfare, but we did see a decline initially when the conflict started between Ukraine and Russia. We saw a great decline in ransomware. Unfortunately for us, they've ramped back up. And as a small to medium-sized business, you really cannot discount the reputation damage a cyber incident or a cyber breach can cause. And oh, by the way, incident and breach, those are actually legal terms. So be really careful when using those terms. So I like to use reputable sources and sources people have heard of. So I use Verizon as one of the sources of information I get on cyber statistics. Everyone's heard of Verizon, although you may not know that they publish an annual data breach investigations report. And as you can see here, they've analyzed almost 1 million incidents, and a little over a quarter of those were confirmed breaches. So what does Verizon have to say? Well, they say there are 3 key paths leading to compromise of your organization, and those would be credentials, phishing, and exploit vulnerabilities. So credentials, simply your usernames and passwords. Where do they get those? Well, they may just be buying them off the dark web. We'll talk a little bit more about the importance of using different usernames and passwords for every login that you have. Sometimes one source is breached and someone is using the same passwords for their social media as they're using for their organization. And what happens is, the bad guys are using automated means and they'll try that username and password everywhere that they can to see if they can get in. Phishing, those are those crazy emails we get asking us to click here immediately. We're going to show you an example that has to do with phishing and exploit vulnerabilities. Well, unfortunately, software developers are not perfect. And when we're creating software, we may leave gaps or holes or make mistakes. And there are bad guys looking for those mistakes to take advantage and get into your system. Some infamous ones are Log4j, SolarWinds, Print Nightmare, all kinds of things like that. So just a quick quiz here to make sure you're still awake. So what percentage of breaches do you think involve the human element? I'll give you just a few seconds because to me, it feels like forever. To you, I'm sure it's super quick. Okay. Actually, 74% of all breaches include the human element, and most of these are error. So some of them are privileged misuse, and cyber insurance is making up for that. You'll see that slide in a little bit. Use of stolen credentials, social engineering. And this is actually, we're doing a little bit better. It's down from 82% from the previous year. The majority of these attacks do involve external actors. They're not insider threat. And the primary motivation, I'm sure, is no shock. It's financial. So I want to show you a little bit about what these threat actors do. So back in the day when I started my career, in order to be a threat actor, you had to be really smart. You had to understand software. You had to understand how networks worked, how email system worked, how firewalls work, how to actually write software, not just understand software. And so I would venture to guess there weren't as many attackers. Definitely weren't as many attacks. And now what happens is these guys, so I can think of one group in particular, Lockbit, they actually make their services available to other people who want to be hackers. And all you need to be a bad guy is you need some cryptocurrency and you need access to the dark web. Super easy to get access to the dark web. All you need is a Tor browser, that is the Onion router. And what happens is you connect to the dark web, and Lockbit offers an affiliate program where you can go and you can buy the software from them, buy any of the services that you want from them. You can use their infrastructure, you can use their help desk, you can use their guidance, you can use their payment processing systems, and they will make you a bad guy with just a little cryptocurrency, and you just split the profits with them. And unfortunately for us, paying the ransom doesn't work out that well. I personally would never recommend you pay the ransom because you are encouraging this type of behavior. You are funding future malware and ransomware. You are funding things like the drug trafficking, human trafficking, all kinds of bad stuff. So I don't recommend you even download a Tor browser because there's a lot of bad stuff you probably don't want to see on the dark web. So what does this say? On average, only 61% of your data is restored after paying the ransom. And guess what? You don't get to pick which 61% that is. And that's actually gone down from the previous year of this report from Sophos. Also, only 4% of companies get all of their data back, and that is drastically down from 8% the previous year. Not only this, they engaged in tactics that we like to call quadruple extortion. The first part of the extortion is asking you to pay the ransom when they encrypt your data. And some of them aren't even encrypting your data. The second one comes along when maybe you're negotiating, maybe you didn't pay, maybe you did pay and they're doing it just for fun. They'll launch a distributed denial of service attack against you. There are many types of DDoS attacks. But all you need to know is that makes your infrastructure unavailable to you, unavailable to your customers, or maybe unavailable to both of you. Makes it really hard to stay in business when you can't access your data and you can't complete your business processes. The third thing that they do is they will actually go ahead and ask for another payment because they'll say, hey, I've got your data. This is what I have. And even if you've paid to stop the DDoS, even if you've paid for the decryption key, they'll say, hey, we have your data. And if you don't pay me again, I'm going to release your data to the public or sell it on the dark web. And then the last one is they've gotten so bold as to actually pick up the phone and call your clients and say, hey, did you know I have your data? This is what I have, and this is where I got it. And they may threaten that client and ask them for a payment, or they may just be busy trying to ruin your reputation. So I'd like to share a couple local stories and a few stories that are really pertinent to the cyber landscape and how it works today. So earlier I mentioned about using the same password, and that's why I have some of these stories on here. So I have the story about Facebook, and I have a story about ChatGPT. And the Facebook one is actually about a vulnerability, and the second one is about ChatGPT creating polymorphic malware, which just means malware that basically self-adjusts. But the reason I have these on here, even though they're very large companies, you may say, I'm a small business. Why do I care about this? Well, the reason you should care about this is I don't have this story on here, but ChatGPT and Facebook have both been breached multiple times. And remember I said about people using their username and password that they use for business on social media? So what happens is when something like this happens and those credentials are harvested, those end up on the dark web. And again, it's not like the old days where somebody is sitting in their basement in a black hoodie, going at it on the keyboard, trying to manually break into your system. I mean, I'm sure some people still do that for fun, but everything they're doing is automated. So if they have a list of usernames and passwords, they're going to hit everything they can hit automatically to try to see where they can get in. They're going to keep knocking on the doors. It's like if a thief were casing my neighborhood and my door is locked, but my neighbor's isn't, they're more likely to go into my neighbor's house because as they're knocking on the door, that door opens, right? The story in the bottom right is about cybercrime. And it's about the cybercrime ecosystem, the ransomware as a service that I just shared with you. Here's a local story about a former IT manager charged with a cyber attack. I understand this is quite close to you. This is really, I think, the exception rather than the rule. As we learned earlier, most threats are not internal. And then there's just another story here about a hospital and about hackers posting data on the dark web after a cyber attack in Massachusetts. The other thing I want to talk about with AI is AI, again, beyond the ransomware as a service, which lowered the barrier to be a bad guy, AI has also lowered the barrier. Good news is we're also using it to protect you. But what this story here in the middle is about so AI can be used to create very realistic faces. It could be a nice man's face, a nice woman's face, it doesn't really matter. But I want to talk to you a minute about something called pig butchering. And they do target the elderly and they do target leaders and businesses. And the way this works is it's really a romance scam. And there are other scams that maybe just involve a business relationship, but this is specifically a romance scam. And you think you've gotten to know somebody over over this interaction with them, and eventually they'll ask you to invest. It's a really elaborate scheme. They have websites set up showing how great the investment is doing. And as you put money in, you don't realize it's a scam until you go to get money out, and they really are milking people dry. So that's just something to be aware of. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about what these bad guys do. Well, this is a real attack that's available for sale on the dark web. And no, I'm not promoting that you go buy it, but evil proxy is one, greatness is another. And the way it works is Bob in accounting. And if your name is Bob, I'm sorry. That's just the name that I use. I apologize. I'm not picking on you. And so this user gets an email. This user gets an email from office.com and it says, hey, Bob, your username and password have been compromised and you need to click here right now, urgency, notice the urgency, and change your password. So Bob goes, ooh, okay. So the way this works is this is called an actor in the middle attack, and that's why I have this actor here in the middle, and he has set up a phishing website. What he's actually set up is a proxy server or a reverse proxy, and excuse me if you're technical, I'm going to make this a really simple definition. All a proxy server is forward information from one location to another, okay? So what happens here, some of the things I want you to notice is that everything says TLS encrypted. You know, in your browser, when you see that little shield or symbol, whatever, that shows that you have a valid security certificate, nothing's expired, nothing looks hokey. Well, we used to tell you that that meant you were great. You're not great anymore with that. All that means is all of your traffic between you and the source you're communicating with is encrypted both ways. Everything's encrypted both ways here. Unfortunately for you or Bob, it's going to be encrypted between him and the bad guy. So Bob clicks the link, unfortunately. He inputs his username and password, and then the bad guy or the actor in the middle has his server forward that to Office. Office gets that, goes, oh, somebody I know. So it prompts for multi-factor authentication. We could have an entire discussion on multi-factor authentication, but for the sake of this demonstration, we're going to assume Bob used the worst kind possible and got a code on his phone. So the site prompts him, the bad guy site prompts him, passes that along and prompts him for that multi-factor authentication code. So Bob completes the multi-factor authentication code. That gets forwarded to office.com. Office goes, oh, I got a username that's valid. I got a password that's valid. And now I have a multi-factor authentication code that is valid. So I am going to create a session cookie. What is a session cookie, you may ask? All you need to know here is that a session cookie is everything that bad actor, that threat actor needs to be you. So then the site redirects, may make a mistake. User doesn't really matter. Nothing else matters at this point. So am I showing you this because multi-factor authentication is bad? Absolutely not. Multi-factor authentication is very good, and it is a part of something we call defense in depth. You need defense in depth. You need multiple tools looking at different things to know if an attacker gets past your defenses. You need multiple defense mechanisms and you need multiple protection mechanisms. So what could have prevented this? Well, the first thing is security awareness training. That is a very high ROI service. It is very economical, and humans, remember, we are the number one cause of breaches and incidents. So that can avoid a lot of breaches and incidents if you don't even click on the link. Even more than that, if in your security awareness training and in your interactions daily, you create what we call a good culture of cybersecurity, if Bob clicks on that link and goes through this process and realizes he's made a mistake, he should go to the right person and say, hey, I made a mistake, so you can mitigate the damage right away, right? Excellent. So what else could help here? Very often when an attacker breaches your email and they're able to get in, remember this is Office, so they've got access to your email, they've got access to your Office documents, they've got access to everything in SharePoint and everything in OneDrive, right? And depending on what kind of permissions you have, they may have access to even more stuff. So maybe the threat actor goes, oh, well, Bob doesn't really have enough access to the things I really want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send out emails to everyone that Bob works with, all of his colleagues internally here. So the attacker's going to do a couple things right here. So he's going to send a malware laced document. Maybe he could see Bob's working on a project with somebody, so he sends some documents that have to do with the project to everyone in the office, and other people click the link, and as his malware starts to execute, what happens if you have an endpoint detection and response system, that should stop that malware from executing and isolate those machines. So that's one way you could stop this threat actor. Another way that this threat actor may be stopped is maybe not only is he sending emails internally, but he's sending emails externally. Now, these threat actors aren't idiots. They know that if you see a bunch of responses coming into your inbox or a bunch of things going out, that it may clue you that something's wrong, right? So what they do is they'll create and delete rules in Outlook to clean up after themselves. So whether those are internal mails or external emails, what will happen is something like a SIM, a security information and event management system, can detect that Outlook rules are being created and deleted. It could also detect if the attacker was trying to exfiltrate a bunch of data. Maybe Bob does have great access. So they're downloading a bunch of financial data or a bunch of proprietary company data from your SharePoint, and a SIM could detect those mass downloads. Another thing that the SIM could detect is the login. So say Bob is in Massachusetts, the attacker's in Lithuania. Nothing against Lithuania, it's just what comes to mind for me. And within 15 minutes, we call that impossible travel. How the heck could Bob be in Massachusetts and 15 minutes later be in Lithuania? I have no idea how long it takes to get there, but I'm guessing it's longer than 15 minutes. And that's just some of the ways those technologies can protect you. So what should you do to protect your business? Well, remember I said it's not all a technology problem? Well, it's not. This is what I call the three-legged stool. The three-legged stool is people, process, and technology. What happens if one of those legs is shorter than the others or is missing altogether? That stool's going to topple over, and so is your cybersecurity protection. Again, let's pick on Bob some more. So Bob actually happens to be the CFO. Bob gets an urgent email from Jen, the CEO, and the email from Jen says, Bob, I'm on vacation. I'm not somewhere where I'm reachable, but I need you to pay this vendor right now. I don't know how this fell through the cracks. I can't believe you didn't pay them, but if you don't pay them right now, production's going to halt. We're not going to be able to make our clients happy. And oh, by the way, their ACH payment information has changed. Bob gets that email. He panics. He's like, oh my gosh, how could I have forgotten to do that? And he pays the bad guy. Now, the email wasn't really from Jen, okay, in this case. It really doesn't matter if it was from Jen. Maybe she was compromised, but it really wasn't from Jen. So why did this happen? Well, Bob didn't have the correct training to say, hey, if you get an email that expresses urgency, there's some things you could do to make sure that that email is really from who you think it is. That email was from somebody he knew, or so he thought, but he wasn't expecting it. So if something is not is so you should only click links if it's from someone you know and you're expecting it. You can always pick up the phone and call. I know here Jen said don't call, but what's the harm in calling another executive or calling Jen or even calling the vendor at a known good number and confirming, right? So that leads to the next one, process. There was no process in place. There was no process that said if you get a change of ACH, you need to verbally confirm that with whoever you're sending payment to. And to send a payment over a certain amount, it has to be verbally approved by, the CEO and somebody else. It doesn't really matter who, right? So we are lacking in the people, we were lacking in the process. We certainly have the technology because that money's gone. So that's just an example of what can happen if you don't have people, process, and technology all covered when you're building your cyber program. So what is that minimum acceptable technology? I want you to notice a few things aren't here, and they're not here because we consider them no duh, like DNS filtering, firewalls, security awareness training. We're at a point that those things are considered must have, and nobody's even gonna, nobody would do business with you. You would certainly be breached if you didn't have those things. But what is the minimum acceptable technology past those no duh things? So an incident response plan. Notice this is not a technical implementation. This is a written document. This is not something that is in your head. I'm talking formal. Multi-factor authentication. There are multiple types. I'm sure Anne and Nancy would love to have a conversation with you about the different types of multi-factor authentication. I'm sure they would love to have conversations with you on the details of how an endpoint detection and response works, or how a security information and event management system works. Business continuity and disaster recovery. And this is a combination of written documents and written policies and a technical implementation of backup, right? And a new one is what we call privileged access management. And that's part of as a specific type of identity access management. And this is talking about really the foundation of zero trust is only assigning enough privileges or enough access to people that they can only, people and technologies, machine communication as well, where they can only access what they need to know and what they need to access when they need to do it. And guess what? If you want reputable, comprehensive, and cost-effective, all three cybersecurity insurance, you have to have all of these things. And can you get cybersecurity insurance without these things? I'm sure you can, but will it be reputable? Will it be comprehensive? No. And will it be cost-effective? Probably not. So now I want to talk a little bit about risk and responsibility. So notice, first of all, this is a circle. Nobody's pointing fingers at anybody else. We're all in this together. But you, as the data owner, business leader, business owner, you own the ultimate liability. Why? Because you create the budget. You establish the budget for protecting your data. And beyond that, we could have two businesses in the exact same business, right? And business A, their business objective is to really make their business very profitable. So it's very attractive for a huge corporation to come in and buy them, and then they can retire and enjoy the rest of their life with their family. Business B is more of a balance. They balance their family life with their business life, but they want to leave a legacy for their family, and they want to pass the business on to their kids. Both of those are great business objectives, but they're very different. So they're going to make different decisions. And on top of that, business A may have a different risk tolerance than business B. So when you're working with someone like Ekaru, they're a business also, they're going to understand that there's different business objectives and different risk tolerance. So they're going to come alongside you, and based on those discussions and based on that information, they're going to provide you risk insight and mitigation information and work to find the cybersecurity solutions that are right for your business. And then, of course, we have the information technology team, also Ekaru in this instance, and they're going to help you implement those solutions, and they're going to be custodians of the data. So they're going to be right there alongside with you. And they're going to give you the information that you need based on your objectives, based on your risk tolerance, to create the right cyber program for you. And it all really comes down to one thing. What risk level are you willing to accept to protect your most valuable assets? And that's a decision that each business leader needs to make on their own. So sometimes the question I get from SMBs is, well, is my data really that interesting to attackers? Remember what I said, this stuff's all automated. So they may not necessarily be going after you. Now, if you produce some kind of widget for the military or for an organization that maybe a hacktivist has a problem with, maybe they do target you. But more than likely, they're just casting a wide net, and you're falling under that net, and they may go after your data. And yes, the answer is your data does have value to an attacker. But the real question, in my opinion, is what value does your business data have to you? Can you continue to stay in business and to operate without your data? If it's encrypted, your chances of getting it back are very slim. So you're going to need to rely on protection and detection mechanisms to make sure that your data is not accessed by bad actors, threat actors in the first place. So with that, what is your data worth? So matching the values is a little hard to do over a webinar. So how about this? Why don't you think about which one of these listed on the left, 1 through 5, is the lowest cost item, which is C, and which one do you think is the highest cost item, which is E? So I'll give you, I don't know, a couple seconds, because like I said, it feels like forever to me, but go ahead and think about it. Well, couple more seconds. Well, access to your corporate network, 2K to 4K. You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like pretty affordable if I'm a bad guy. Sounds like I'm going to get a really great return on my investment if it's only going to cost me 2K or even 4K to access your corporate network. And then how sad for us. I guess the credit reporting agencies have been breached so often that our social security number has lost all value. Now, if you're bored and you want to do a Google search, search for what an infant social security number goes for on the dark web. Don't go to the dark web, go to the internet and search for infant social security number cost on the dark web or price on the dark web. Your mind is going to be blown. So let's wrap it all up in a cybersecurity analogy. So we're on the cyber side, we speak one language. Now, I do my best to translate that language to you guys so you understand what I'm talking about. So I'm not speaking in super technical terms that are too difficult for someone not in cyber to understand. But there are a lot of technical things that happen in cyber having to do with the technology, the people, and the processes, right? So we're the experts, Ekaru, I'm an expert in cyber. We understand that stuff. We could talk to each other in a much different language than we speak to you in. But you are over here speaking in the language of your business or non-geek language, right? So how do we bridge that gap between the cyber language and your language? Common language so we can all understand what we're doing. So first we acknowledge we have a language barrier, right? And then we use an analogy. So I'm going to explain to you how this analogy is going to help us. So everyone lives in a home. Could be a beautiful house like this, could be a condo, could be apartment, whatever, right? So in a home, we have things that we identify that we want to protect. So if I was doing this live with you, I'd ask you to shout out, what is in your home that you would like to protect? And people shout out things like family, pets, me, it's my Lego collectibles, my husband's sports memorabilia, documents, not your social security card, only worth $1, your electronics and your computers. And even beyond that, we need to categorize those things. So say I bought this big LED TV, right? And I spent thousands and thousands of dollars on it, right? Like 2 weeks ago. And I forget to lock my door. So the bad guy comes in, takes my TV. I'm super sad, right? But I have reputable, comprehensive, and more or less cost effective homeowners insurance, maybe not cost effective. And I get a brand new TV, and it's much better than my old TV, right? Because they don't make that TV anymore. That was 2 weeks ago, right? Technology moves so fast. There's no more of those TV. So, but what if my home computer's stolen? Even if I've done all the right things, there is the chance that the bad guy can break in. And in that computer, I have my financial information. I have information on where my kids go to school. I have that is a much different thing than my TV. And so that's what I mean by categorize. How do I protect the things that are important to me? Well, obviously I have doors and windows, right? I have locks that hopefully I'm using. Education. When I was a kid, my parents would tell me, don't open the door to strangers. Nobody comes to your door anymore, right? Hardly. So now we tell our kids, don't friend strangers on social media. And that goes for you adults too. Don't friend strangers on social media. Don't become a victim of a pig butchering scam, a romance scam, or an investment scam, or any of those other scams. Our yard signs. Are yard signs protected by Simply Safe, protected by Brinks, whoever, right? What if someone gets past our protection? So alarm, a motion sensor, a Ring doorbell camera. If you have a Ring doorbell camera, I hope you're using multi-factor authentication because and you've changed your password because they have been breached. Your nosy neighbors. How do we respond? Maybe you have an attack dog. Maybe you see that it's too dangerous, so you run away. You get away from the situation. Maybe you call law enforcement. Maybe you have to protect yourself with a baseball bat. Now let's round it all back out to cybersecurity. How do we recover? Well, in cybersecurity, we would recover with a cyber incident response plan or business continuity and disaster recovery plan. In my home, I have we make disaster plans. I live in Florida, so we are subject to hurricanes from November to whoever knows when that ends anymore. And we have to have a plan, right? We have to have a response plans. Where would we meet if we got separated? Who would we call first? And really, these should all be written plans. Insurance. You should have cyber insurance. You probably have homeowners, or renters or personal liability. And, it might even require emergency equipment or incident responders. There are cyber attacks that have real world consequences, like Google Stuxnet, you'll see that one. Also local to me, at one point, a bad guy went after our water system. Fortunately, they were stopped. So that may have required, if they had poisoned the water system in our area, that may have required incident responders or emergency equipment. And of course, if there's a cyber incident or breach, you're going to require cyber incident responders or possibly even emergency equipment. And that business continuity and disaster recovery, that includes natural events too, like loss of power, you know, due to any type of storm, or, losing your power for 15 minutes is much different than losing your power for an entire week. You have to have plans. So why is this important and why does this help us? Well, I just taught you the NIST cybersecurity framework: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And this is how we're going to communicate with you. We're going to figure out what you have, categorize it, how we should protect it, how we detect if someone gets past those protections, what our response should be, and how we recover if it happens, when it happens. Unfortunately, it's more likely when it happens instead of an if it happens. So these are the components of a well-designed cyber solution for your business. Notice it includes stuff like security awareness, DNS protection, endpoint detection and response, SIM, mobile device security, all kinds of things. So how do we know, once we understand your business objectives and your risk tolerance, and we've identified what you have and decide how to protect it and detect, how do we decide what you need to do when? Well, we're going to start with a security assessment because we need to understand where you are now and where you want to go, and create a roadmap and have those deep discussions on what is right for your organization. And then I want to wrap it up with this saying. So when I was a software developer, I had a boss who would always say, the perfect is the enemy of done. And I was like, that sounds so cool. That must be a real quote. So it is. It's a philosopher quote. And having a philosopher quote in your slide deck makes you seem really smart. So of course I put it in here. So the perfect is the enemy of good. And what would happen as software developers is we would go above and beyond our client requirements. Sometimes because we were nice, but more than likely because we were competing with one another. So if we had to access a certain piece of data in like 30 seconds, we would say, well, I can do that in 15. Well, I can do that in 5. Or, I can make this code better by doing this or that. And our boss would say, timeout, perfect is the enemy of done. We need to get it done. And if we want to make recommendations to make it better, or the client comes back and says, well, I'd like you to tweak this a little more, then we'll do that. The reason I'm sharing this story with you is with cybersecurity, I just shared a lot of information with you, and your head may be going and exploding. The most important thing for you to do is do something. Start now. Perfect is the enemy of good. Now, if you sit there and get paralyzed and do nothing, it's not going to help you or your business. And where should you start? You should speak with Ekaru about security. Start with that risk assessment. And then you'll create that roadmap. You'll know where you are now, and you'll know where you're going. So with that, I want to say thank you to Anne and to Nancy and to all of you who were here to listen to me today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.